Best rivalry in college football, here it is, and it means so much more this year. Two undefeated teams for the first time in 16 years, Ohio State, Michigan. Yes, Michigan fans, it's Michigan, Ohio State. I get it. We got Steve Deace here, Michigan podcast. Couldn't let the week go by without talking to Steve. Steve, how you doing tonight?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I am doing just fine. I am guessing you're going to watch the game this year.
I had actually hotly debated continuing on with what happened last year, where I just gotten so beat down by the previous couple of years. I just said I can't watch it anymore after 20 years of this until Michigan wins. And I went to the movies. People didn't think I was telling the truth when I said that for a year, because you know me, Mark, I do all kinds of things I don't really believe. I did it. I went to the movies, had no idea what happened, taped the game, came home. I was shocked that they won. And I was tempted to continue on with that. And then I realized I'm not a pagan, so I don't do superstitions like that. So, yeah, I'll watch.
Love it. Okay. I did believe that you were going to carry that through, though. I knew you well enough. Yes. Steve is going to do what he says. Okay. Looking at this game, I got to tell you, Steve, my goodness, talking about superstition and maybe just looking at the worst possible scenario. I went live during halftime of the Michigan-Illinois game, and Michigan fans were ready to jump off a bridge collectively. This wasn't one person, two people. This was dozens of people, basically. Our season's over. I'm not even going to watch next week. We don't even need to play this game because your best running back is hobbling off to the locker room at halftime.
Well, I mean, he's arguably the best player in college football this year. I mean, that's a pretty big loss. They had ample opportunity to build a more diversified attack throughout the course of the season. They did not do it. For a while, I thought it was stubbornness, but as the time has gone on, I've realized I think this is more out of necessity. I just don't believe. And I give him a lot of credit. He made a couple of had to have or you go home throws on Saturday. But the reason that J.J. McCarthy had to make those throws is because he missed about 5 others that would have been easy chunk plays, if not touchdowns. Easy. Like the kind of throws, I'm just sorry that if you're a Division I college quarterback, and I love me some J.J. McCarthy, all right? I mean, I paid good money out of my own pocket. My son doesn't know this yet, but to get a J.J. McCarthy autographed football for him for helmet for him for Christmas, okay? So, but you know me, I'm going to call balls and strikes. And I mean, he's has missed throws. I don't want to hear about the win this week. Everybody, you know, I don't run a fan site that needs access to the program. So I'll tell you what I really think. All right. There is no excuse for many of the throws that he has missed the last few weeks. He has regressed where that is concerned. He's been sub 500 or barely 500 for several weeks. And Michigan's passing game is just broken, Mark. And it won't get fixed this week. Doesn't mean that Michigan can't win, but it won't be because they suddenly click. On play action passes, they have one of the best QBRs of any program in the country. They don't run a lot of them. And I do think you'll see a lot on Saturday. I think Michigan will try to play action pass Ohio State to death. But that's what we have to do. We cannot straight drop back and find and get guys open. It just isn't happening this year. Hasn't happened all year. I think they're going to look at Ron Bellamy, the wide receivers coach, after this season is over. These are the same receivers we had last year, plus Ronnie Bell. And that unit has dramatically, that's the most underperforming unit on the team by far. So I think that as the season went on, and I saw this at the Nebraska game. I was there. First time I'd seen Michigan from an all-22 standpoint. And you just certain things you can't see on TV. And it was clear they were trying because they knew Nebraska had no shot to win. They were really trying in that game to get some form of just straight drop back downfield passing game. And it's not happening. The issues that exist there are going to take a long developmental period, like, you know, 15 bowl practices or a 15 spring practice or an off season. It's just not there. And I think as time went on, I don't think they had any plans. I mean, this is the same coach that the last 2 weeks, Mark, this coaching staff, if anybody has had a wheeze, has needed a Band-Aid, we've not played them. I mean, we basically played Illinois with the 2023 Michigan football team on Saturday. I mean, they have been beyond precautionary the last couple of weeks, resting up for this game. So no, I don't believe they just pumped 31 carries into Blake Corum against Nebraska in a 31-point win or whatever it was out of stubbornness or Heisman showcase. They have to. They had to do that. So what'll be fascinating, I mean, I think he'll suit up and play Saturday. No way, shape, or form is he going to be taking like 25 carries or anything like that. So it'll be fascinating to see what they cobble together to compensate for that. In a strange way, it might work to their advantage. I mean, you have to think if you're Ohio State. I mean, we felt this way going against Illinois. We thought Chase Brown got carried off the field. What else do they have? Then he comes in and he does it. Has a great game against us. But the Michigan coaching staff will have to cobble together an offensive game plan dramatically different than anything that has been seen all season long.
So let's stay with the passing game here. You mentioned Ronnie Bell. He's extremely reliable, not a downfield guy, but extremely reliable. And then you've got, you see shots like you mentioned, I believe, alluded to the one to Andrell Anthony that clanked right off of his face mask, basically right through his hands. That was a beautifully thrown ball. That was a laser shot from JJ. That shows you what he can do, what he's capable of. When you look at, and then we got the two best tight ends on the team have been shelved. We would expect Schoonover would be able to make it against Ohio State. The third string tight end looks like he's going to be a player down the road. Loveland.
Yep.
He looks really good.
Yep.
How do you assess?
He should have had 2 touchdowns against Illinois yesterday. I mean, I'm just sorry. I love JJ, but I don't. If you are a Division I quarterback, man, forget 5-star recruit from IMG. You are a Division I quarterback. If you are a sentient being with a scholarship, you have to make those throws. You have to.
He was hitting like 77% of his throws until 3 or 4 games ago. Sure, he's gone against better defenses. Sure, the wide receivers have been inconsistent the whole season. But what's not working? How much do you assess? It can't be all JJ.
No, the whole thing is broken. The timing's broken. The route tree's broken. The separation is broken. When one thing goes right, something goes wrong. There was a play earlier in the game that would have been a touchdown to Andrell. Another one before the one that you're talking about. That would have been a touchdown to Andrell. He overthrew him by like 10 yards.
Oh, yep.
Okay. I mean, so if it's not one thing, it's another. It is systemically broken. Systemically. Now, that could play to their advantage Saturday. I know you like handicapping. One of the underrated trends in sports handicapping is the injured player theory. Playing the team that just lost its star player right after that. Like after we get 2 or 3 games in, reality kind of sets in, right? But that first game after that, everybody kind of raises their game, realizing that they got a chip on their shoulder. And I could see a scenario, especially because I saw a lot of your defensive coordinator in the Big 12. And you and I had this talk before the start of the year. He's not a man ball. They don't do man ball stuff there. He's a non-Brown coordinator. That I could really see them just absolutely go cover 1, cover 0 every down, if with a hobbled Blake Corum in there. And I could see Michigan in that scenario play action Ohio State to death. And that is where we have had an effective passing game. One of the great mysteries has been, why are we throwing 3 play action? Now, we threw a lot more against Illinois because we had to. And those guys were open. We just didn't connect. So the Illinois game aside, we had averaged something like only 3 or 4 play action throws a game. And we probably should have been doing like 9 or 10. And the theory here internally in the Michigan community is that game plan was being saved for this game if it was needed. All right. And it turns out we needed it last game, and those throws were there. We just missed almost all of them.
During the offseason, Steve, we're going to delve into this quarterback deal, not just this particular football team and roster, but Harbaugh's legacy at Michigan and not developing quarterbacks and not recruiting and signing the level of player that they need at that position. But again, let's focus on this game. But I really want to take that straight through that entire process and the history of what we've seen over the last 8 or 9 years at Michigan. Ohio State's dealing with its own running back room. Dallin Hayden stepped in against Maryland, and I thought in previous attempts and watching him against decent defenses that probably a little too slight, not experienced enough, don't want to risk the ball in his hands time after time after beating, after pounding, that it might be on the ground at some point, but he showed himself pretty ready for at least Maryland and improved Maryland defense. But Ohio State, I would think in the Michigan corner, the fan base collectively has licked its chops over what they've seen or not seen out of Ohio State's running game.
Yes and no. I mean, I really think that this game is really more about the overall health of the Michigan team more than anything else. I think this is the first time that I can ever remember. Yeah, looking back on it, it's the first time I can ever remember. Ohio State went to a spread offense before we did under Jim Tressel, but I mean, philosophically, formationally, Ohio State football changed, but philosophically, it didn't. So I mean, it was still a power, physical, smash mouth offense for the most part, whether it was Beanie Wells or name your tailback in that era. This is the first time I can ever remember in the history of the rivalry that the two teams, in terms of their styles, are this dramatically different. And in many respects, it is like a college basketball game, like an NCAA tournament game, where you have one team that wants to get up and down the court and another team that, first one to 65 wins. And history has shown that it is always always is a tough word. Let's not say that. But most of the time, it is simpler to make the team that wants to get up and down the court to force them to play slow than to force the slow team to play fast. And I think that does play to Michigan's advantage, but I think a lot of that comes down to how healthy is Michigan. How much of what we've seen the last few weeks? I mean, Mark, we have played walk-on running backs. I mean,
So, Steve, we're basically talking Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards. We're talking the two tight ends. We're
CJ Stokes got hurt. That's why the walk-on was it. So we were down to our fourth stringer. Isaiah Gash is a walk-on.
Gash played. Yeah.
So Schoonmaker, Eric Gall's been out pretty much since the opener of the season. So you're playing a freshman and a former walk-on, Max Bredesen, at tight end. They have played 9 different offensive line combinations this year, Mark, 9 different ones. Now, that's typically not a stat of a team that is 11-0. Typically, when you look at the team that starts in the preseason top 10 and is unranked at the end of the year, 2 things you look at right away: turnover margin and how many offensive line combinations do they have to play, right? Okay. We've played 9 different offensive line combinations this year. We had our best defensive player, our 2 best defensive players were not in the game at the end against Illinois. Mike Morris didn't play the entire game. Junior Colson was out of the game at the end of the game. Makari Page has sparingly played the last couple of weeks, and he had really come on at safety. Jamon Green has played spot duty since the concussion with the tunnel assault. Mozzie Smith was out a lot on Saturday. I mean, we were playing for a lot of Saturday. We were playing the 2023 Michigan defensive front. Who else? Khalil Mullings, who's our top backup at linebacker. He's been out for a few weeks as well. So I'm not sure how many of these we're being hypersensitive because of what's at stake against Ohio State. How much of it is guys are really injured? Saturday we'll find out. Every able-bodied person who can be medically cleared will play on Saturday, obviously. And I don't know the answer, Mark, and I don't think anybody will know the answer until the game is kicked off on Saturday, and maybe even well into the first quarter. We start seeing, okay, guys are dressed and they're playing, but are they able to go 70 snaps in a physical, high-level college football game? And I don't know the answer to that. I love giving uncertain opinions. I love doing that. I love hedging my bets and not being certain of what I think. But I don't know who will suit up for Michigan on Saturday. I don't.
Steve, we could have previewed this game each and every year for the last 40 or 45 years. And if weather would have been brought up by me, it would have simply been, okay, yeah, it's going to be 18 degrees out. And
right.
And it's going to be fun to watch, and both sides are going to have to deal with it kind of thing. I believe I told you on your show last year that I got a text from either my daughter or son. My daughter cares nothing about college football unless it's related to Ohio State somewhat, just making sure that they win each week. And then Michigan game, she's locked in on that one. She sends me the weather report from Ann Arbor. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning the night before the game. And my response was just, I didn't even process it, was just simply, uh-oh, because I knew that meant something. Now, losing a football game because of weather conditions is a complete excuse, but it is a factor. There's a difference between factors and excuses.
Mm-hmm.
It would be a complete excuse that you can't play football outside where it's supposed to be played. But let's face it, I looked at some wind and a little rain, sleet, possibilities, 40 degrees, something in that range on Saturday, and that is a Michigan day.
I know one of your color guys on your radio broadcast said during the broadcast a couple weeks ago, apparently, that these games should all be played indoors in a dome to truly test athletic advantages. And I thought to myself, Woody Hayes will come back here and kick your ass. Are you kidding me with this? I mean, I saw somebody sent me a story where one of the Weather Channel guys was being interviewed and said he cannot believe the amount of requests he has gotten from people that live in the state of Ohio for the advanced weather forecast for the for the game. And I'm just like, maybe I'm getting old, man. I'm going to be 50 here in a year. So, maybe I'm, old man yells at cloud guy, but that blows me away. I mean, CJ Stroud threw for nearly 400 yards last year, Mark. I mean, that game could have been a 50 burger if not for the hero ball catches that Garrett Wilson and those guys were making in those conditions. I don't think that those conditions had anything to do with the outcome of that game. I just don't.
But you would agree that it would favor the running team. Not necessarily in that game specifically, but overall in any football game.
I mean, the bottom line of that game last year was Ohio State threw the ball pretty much when it had time, threw the ball pretty much anywhere it wanted to, and its guys made hero ball catches all game long. I mean, the reality is Ohio State couldn't stand up at the point of attack on either side of the line of scrimmage. That's the reality.
Yeah,
Michigan could run. Michigan ran the ball whenever it wanted to, and they couldn't protect Stroud enough on third down, and that was the difference in that game. And I mean, I have no idea how somehow the speed rusher off the edge wasn't impacted by the snow on the field, Aiden Hutchinson, but the Ohio State passing game that had nearly 400 yards was. I have just sat here and been befuddled to watch a segment of your fan base just psych themselves out over that. I don't get it. I don't get. And then I watched. I didn't get it at all and thought it was kind of an internet trope and way overblown. Then I watched the Ohio State Northwestern game, and now I think I might kind of get it a little bit. The body language of that Ohio State team looked like it wanted no part of being in that game for long stretches. Northwestern, essentially played with 10 guys on the field that doesn't have a quarterback. Their offense was the Wildcat. You know how much I love that, Mark. Every time a Wildcat fails, an angel gets his wings, okay? So they're out there with white chocolate running back, white Wildcat, and running for when they have no passing game, playing with 10 guys, getting 200 yards against Ohio State, who just their body language, it kind of reminded me of is growing up as a kid with the Detroit Lions teams with Barry Sanders playing in the Silverdome. Then they'd go out, they'd make the playoffs almost every year and then have to go like outdoors to like Green Bay or Washington, D.C., like, you know what I'm saying, in January. And you can just tell from their body language that we don't want to run the run and shoot out here. Let's just get this over with, take our beating and go home. Get our chicken sandwich and head on out. And that was kind of the body language that Ohio State had against Northwestern. And that was the first time that I started to think maybe there really is something to this. And it's not just a whiny fan internet trope that you're pissed that you lost this game once in 20 years. So here's our excuse. Maybe it's a real thing. I don't know. We'll find out Saturday. Depends on the weather. Right? So both fan bases right now are gripping, and with things that neither one that their teams really cannot control. Ohio State can't control what the weather will be in Columbus on Saturday, and Michigan can't really control who's going to be healthy enough to play. So those maybe might be the two factors that determine the outcome of this game.
One of the most impressive aspects I've seen out of Michigan football this year, in addition to the overall effort against Penn State on both sides of the ball, was going to Kinnick and running Blake Corum over and over and over and over and running on a defense that nobody runs on, except for, I guess, Mo Ibrahim did this past weekend, but they couldn't score. And then Ohio State, of course, had that 3-week Iowa Penn State run. And I'm trying to think who they played the next week that they couldn't run the football. And, I told you before we started this whole thing in week 1 that Notre Dame game was going to show me a lot about Ohio State's toughness up front and if they really were determined to playing physical football. And I thought that they conquered that or showed us something in week 1, but it's dissipated ever since. So
it's very, it's funny. Ohio State trying to establish a physical running presence is similar to Michigan trying to establish a downfield passing game. About the same juncture of the season, when it looked like both of them maybe had discovered a curveball, teams then began saying, "Okay, prove it to us now. We're not just going to automatically assume, right?" I think what happened in that Iowa game is all the early tape on JJ was good, and the other thing with JJ too is the running threat. Now he has barely ran the last few weeks. It's clear again. They don't want to take because we're not talking about a guy that's 230 pounds. He's maybe 197. So they clearly wanted to limit the amount of hits he was going to take before this game. I think you'll see him run more Saturday than he has all season long. And you're talking about a legit 4.5, 4.55 guy back there at quarterback that can crease you if you overplay the run. And so I think Iowa, knowing that, having the running film from last year and having some of the early passing film and against those non-conference scrubs, they stayed back and played a lot of 2 safety high and didn't load the box. And so Michigan was just content to say, hey, we'll just take 5 or 6 yards all game long, not risk turnovers, not risk throwing into the teeth of that opportunistic Iowa secondary. You mentioned Mo Ibrahim had over, 260 yards. Minnesota couldn't stop handing the ball to Iowa and killing itself. That's how Iowa wins games. And so we got we got a little further into the season, and more teams started saying after Penn State, all right, we can't have them do this to us any longer. All right. So JJ has to show he can beat us. And he wasn't able to do it, but we were just so much physically better than those teams. It just didn't matter. Blake Corum had 168 yards against Nebraska. Didn't have a run over 12 yards. Just 5 yards, 8 yards, 5 yards, 8 yards, almost like a triple option attack every down. Nothing you can do about it. And if it's 4th and 2 and less, we're going for it because we're going to get it, right? Like a triple option team. Saturday was the first time that we ran into a defensive front that played us the way everybody's played us the last few weeks, but had players at the line of scrimmage that could actually take a punch in the mouth at the line of scrimmage. But even there, Corum had 100 yards at the half. Everybody forgets that's 1st and 10 inside the Illinois 10-yard line right there when he drops the ball going for his knee. We're at worst it's 10-3. But let's say nothing happens. That's a casual play. Worst thing is that's 10-3, and we've got a lot of momentum going into the half because we got some points there before the half. I mean, if that game's 14-3 and Blake Corum's healthy, now what do you think the final score is, right?
Sure.
It ain't 19-17. Now it's probably not 35-7. It's probably more like 27-13 or something, and Michigan never really was in doubt. Illinois played hard, a little bit like your game. Maryland hung around, but I don't think anybody ever felt like Ohio State could lose that game. You thought for a bit maybe Michigan might actually lose this one, okay? So that one play was a huge swing in the game and maybe the entire season. So I think it's fascinating. It's a fascinating psychological exercise. You would think, and typically all the pressure should be on Michigan. They are the defending champs. They won the game last year. But everybody and their mother. Is Heather Dinich done campaigning for Michigan to not be in the top 4 of the college football playoff yet? Everybody and their mom in the media is just assuming Ohio State is going to win. There's no pressure on us at all. I've never seen less pressure on a defending, reigning Big Ten champion that was like a name program, not like a year Drew Brees leads Purdue, right? Can you think of a time that there was less pressure on a blue blood, a reigning Big Ten champion than there is on Michigan right now? There's none. There's absolutely none. None.
People expect Ohio State to win.
Yeah, everybody just expects Ohio State to win. I mean, it's only now we didn't start playing 11 games in college football until 1970, I think it was, or 1971.
Yeah.
And so this is only the fourth time since then that Michigan's even been 11-0. So, and you know, it does remind me a little bit, although this is a better Michigan team record-wise, but it reminds me a little bit of some of those games in the mid-'90s when Ohio State was the higher-ranked team and it was the expectation they were going to beat Michigan. Like I think of 95 and 96, I think Ohio State was number 2 in the country back-to-back years, right?
Yep.
Lost both of those games. I mean, there is no pressure on Michigan at all. Now, sometimes that's because there shouldn't be. You know, so I kind of suspect Ohio State will win by like 10 or 14, or Michigan will win outright. I do think if it's a one-score game, I think with Tennessee's loss, we are very close to, if the game is competitive on Saturday, Michigan, Ohio State, and Georgia are locks to get into the playoff, and we're determining who the fourth team is. And does that, you know, if Georgia beats LSU, then they're out. If LSU beats Georgia, there's no way an SEC champion is not getting in. Well, I shouldn't say that. Like if LSU were to somehow lose to Texas A&M on Saturday, a 3-loss SEC champion is not getting it. Okay, but I'm assuming that won't happen. TCU, it looks like he's gonna have to play Kansas State again. And remember, Kansas State was up 28-10 in that game before their quarterbacks got hurt. Okay, so you know I don't think it's a stretch at all that Kansas State could win that Big 12 championship game. I think if the committee really thought highly of Clemson over Michigan or Ohio State now, they wouldn't be so far behind them in the rankings. North Carolina losing doesn't help Clemson. So I think you're probably talking about USC. So if the game, I think Bill Connolly at SP and Plus Analytics has it 28-22 Ohio State. I think if it's that kind of game, I think it's very likely both teams are still getting into the playoff.
So let's take a reasonable facsimile of some kind of chaos, but not a ton of chaos. We'll not make it ridiculous. But out of USC, TCU, and Clemson, let's say 2 of them are in the hunt. They've done what they need to do. Let's say USC loses. And so it's a Clemson 1-loss championship team, and it's a TCU. Let's say they lose. Well, they're going to have to lose to Iowa State. Let's say they're undefeated. If they're undefeated, Georgia wins the SEC, which eliminates LSU, of course. Then you're looking at Georgia, TCU, Clemson, obviously the Big Ten champion. Or
no, TCU's not in that group. TCU's undefeated. They're in the playoff. Doesn't matter what anybody else does.
Yes, I'm just lining up the 4 that get in. Georgia, the Big Ten champ, and TCU. So it's Clemson against the Ohio State Michigan loser. And you're saying you're getting indicators from the committee.
Yeah, I think if the Michigan Ohio State game is close, then it will be that loser. Yeah.
Okay. Steve, before we let you go,
I mean, don't you? I mean, Clemson's ranked 9th.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, and because the one thing you have to know about this committee, there's a reason why it's hard to move from like 12 at the end. Because they craft a narrative throughout these. That's why they do this weekly event for TV. It's not just for TV ratings. It's to craft the narrative that they want. Okay?
Sure.
And so if they wanted to put Clemson closer into striking distance, if they wanted them in the playoff, they would have put them more. They would have done that narrative to put them more into striking distance. They not only didn't do that, but they had North Carolina at 9-1, ranked 12th. Okay? Or no, 13th.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like what you could see they did for Alabama, where after Alabama lost to Tennessee, they found a way to put Texas with 3 losses in the poll to still give Alabama a top 25 win. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
There's no narrative being crafted to aid in a bet Clemson here at all. Not.
What's going to be interesting there is to see where Tennessee goes, because Tennessee still has a tremendous resume, but they've got this egregious loss, and they've got to keep them ahead of LSU and Alabama.
I agreed with that until I heard this afternoon that Hendon Hooker tore his ACL. So now, if you're the committee, you need a narrative to move Tennessee down and move LSU up. Because people forget about a month ago, Tennessee went to Baton Rouge and named the frickin' score on LSU, right? Okay. Now you have your narrative, right? Because that's all this committee is. That's why we desperately need the expanded playoff with some form of a play-in automatic bid process. because the entire thing is not a playoff. It's an invitational based completely off subjective opinions and data. All right. And so they need a narrative to not have Tennessee still higher than LSU and Alabama. Now they can do it. Hendon Hooker tore his ACL. He's out for the year. So it's not the same Tennessee team. Now you have your narrative. That's always what they're looking for, is a narrative, a credible narrative to craft the conclusion that they want. Clearly the top three teams are ahead of everybody else. Now maybe they'll shock us and say, I don't know, beating Baylor on a last-second field goal is not as bad as beating Illinois on a last-second field goal, and they flip those two. If that happens, then this, in my opinion, will change. I don't anticipate that'll happen on Tuesday, though. So if on Tuesday, if the top three are still Georgia, Ohio State, and Michigan, the committee is telling you that they think those three teams – there's only two teams in the country that have won the stat battle in every game this year, Georgia and Michigan. So the committee is telling you that those three teams are ahead of everybody else. And we're really just talking about who the fourth team is going to be. If TCU wins out, it'll be them. If they don't and USC wins out, it'll be them. If LSU wins out, I think it'll be them. And then maybe the loser of the Big Ten, the Michigan-Ohio State game is out, depending on if TCU's undefeated and USC. But basically, the four teams that are going to make this playoff are in that 6-team group that I just mentioned. Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, TCU, LSU, USC. And maybe if there's total carnage, let's say Ohio State and Michigan, one of them blows the other out. LSU beats Georgia. They'd probably need Georgia to beat LSU. Yeah. USC loses to either Notre Dame or in the Pac-12 championship game. Then maybe you take a 12-1 Clemson at that point. So there are the 6 teams that are in a tier by themselves, and then Clemson, I guess, is your outlier. In case of emergency, you need one more big name program, break glass. That's what Clemson's the emergency play.
Dabo would love to hear that. Steve, before we let you go, when you need to feel good for Michigan, Ohio State week, or any time during a drab February or March day, and you're going on YouTube, what are some of your go-tos from the history of this series?
My number one go-to is the 1986 game, simply because the level of production quality CBS put into that game looks good for this era, let alone, we're talking, cinematic for 1986. The Rocky intro,
Musburger era Parsegan game, right?
Yes, the Rocky intro. The production quality of that game for that game is phenomenal. It was a tremendous game. Bo became Michigan's winningest coach by winning that game. That was the game where Jimmy guaranteed the victory after we were undefeated, number 2 in the country, and got upset the previous week on Senior Day to Minnesota. So that's a must watch. A lot of star players in that game. Ohio State gets off to a 14-3 start with Chris Carter at wide receiver, and Michigan comes back, but it really wasn't Harbaugh that day. Even though he ended up finishing 3rd in the Heisman Trophy, it was really Jamie Morris just running over Chris Spielman that day. And then Ohio State missed a pretty makeable field goal at the end that might have won him the game. So that's there. 1987, of course, number 1 versus number 4. That is absolutely on the list. The 2003 game, which is the 100th rendition of the game, that was Keith Jackson's last game at the Big House. The introduction to that is pretty potent and powerful as well. And that, then last year was not a game, Mark. It was an exorcism.
Maybe I only take this approach because my team's won 17 of 19 or whatever the number is, but I actually sometimes torture myself and go back and watch Ohio State losses to Michigan.
No, I saw enough of those live recently.
Okay. Yeah. Steve Deace, Michigan podcast. Always phenomenal stuff. Steve, we appreciate it. Thanks for being here.
You got it, guys. Go Blue.